What is the best budget magnetic keyboard? Which is better, this, that, or this? I've been getting a lot of questions like that, and I really appreciate that you guys trust me and go to me for those types of questions. That's why I'm making this video, and by the end I hope I can help you find an answer to that question. Now, it is actually not that simple, but at the same time it is also pretty simple. Like, I think a lot of people think there's like only one answer to the best magnetic keyboard. For example, this one is the Slice 75HE. Yes, I can see it actually being one of the best magnetic keyboards for a lot of people, but not for everyone. Some people might think this is too expensive. Some people might think it doesn't look good or doesn't sound good. So in order to find out if a magnetic keyboard is gonna be the best for you, you will have to understand and consider these factors. Starting with the budget. And I think it is also pretty obvious. For example, I have the A68 over here, which you can get for around below $50, sometimes less, like depends where you buy it from. But you're comparing a budget option like this to something like 4 times its price, and you're gonna ask me which is better? Well, if we're talking about quality and software performance, you can definitely expect more in the 4 times the price keyboard. So first ask yourself, how much are you willing to spend? And that should narrow down your options much more. You'll actually be surprised how good budget magnetic keyboards are these days. And you'll also be surprised how good and amazing $200 magnetic keyboards are. Now, next important thing you should consider when buying a magnetic keyboard is its software. Especially with magnetic keyboards, it's not like a normal keyboard where you'll just change the RGB, remap the keys, and then boom, you're done. With magnetic keyboards, you might have to adjust the actuation points for quite a good amount of time, especially if you're planning to use them on multiple games or different purposes, gaming, work, daily use, because there's just so much more features on magnetic keyboards. That is also why on my reviews, I always show the software and if it's easy to access, is it downloadable, is it web-based. I do recommend a web-based one because you don't have to download anything, especially if you're planning to buy a budget one and the brand is kind of unknown. Having a web-based software might be a good idea. So, you know, it doesn't have to be sketchy. Is this legit? Should I download this? You don't have to think too much about it. But yeah, the best case scenario is if the magnetic keyboard does have both a web-based and downloadable software. An example of a magnetic keyboard or brand that does that is Mchos, which is very nice. Another thing about softwares is you can't expect all magnetic keyboard features to be in all the other magnetic keyboards. For example, SOCD. Before, there is just specific keyboards that has that, but thankfully now, pretty much almost all new magnetic keyboards does have that feature. But another feature that isn't very present in all magnetic keyboards is the analog or gamepad feature, which I think is also getting more popular now though. But yeah, there is a lot of magnetic keyboards that still doesn't have that today, the gamepad feature. If you're curious what gamepad is, it pretty much turns your keyboard into something like a controller. So if you're playing a racing game, the deeper you press the key, for example A, the more it steers to the left, something like that, if that made sense. You can do more research about it, and I also made a separate video about that. So in summary, consider ease of use, and if it does have all of the features you will be needing and using, double check that. Oh, and one more thing, it is kind of related to software, but can also be not. If you're planning to switch profiles a lot, for example, you want to have a one for your typing, one for your gaming, or you want for a different game, some keyboards have very easy ways to switch profile. For example, the Mix 87 does have one button that you press and it switches to the rapid trigger profile. The Slice 75HE, you can just do a combination, for example, FN plus a certain amount of key that you can program in the software, and with that single press of the combination key, it does change the profile very easily without needing to open the software. So if that's something you're looking for, then yeah, you can also double check if the keyboard does have that. I'm pretty sure I do mention it most of the time on my reviews as well, if a keyboard does have that. Now, moving on to the next thing you should consider is, of course, the performance, the latency of the keyboard. Now, I'm not gonna lie, almost every new magnetic keyboard does have pretty decent performance already, budget or non-budget. Like a keyboard that I reviewed, which cost like $49, is actually faster than a $300 magnetic keyboard. So yeah, recently performance isn't really gonna be an issue you should be worrying about. But some numbers that you can look for when buying a magnetic keyboard just to make sure is if it does have 8000 Hz polling rate. A lot of new magnetic keyboards have 8000 Hz polling rate now. If it does have a 0.1mm actuation or accuracy, the lower the better, of course. So you might find 0.001, 0.0005, like crazy low numbers, the lower the better. For the scanning rate, as long as it matches the polling rate, you should be good. Ideally, to get the most out of the polling rate, you should double it. That's gonna be your scan rate. But again, I think as long as it's not below your polling rate, it should be good. Of course, the higher the polling rate and the scanning rate, the better. But I don't think it really matters if like your scanning rate is 128k or 256k. You can find that sometimes. It's not really gonna make much of a difference, especially if your polling rate is just around 8,000, which is already crazy impressive. Now, if you want to make sure you can also test out the latency of the keyboard. In my reviews, I do have a testing chapter in my videos where I test out the milliseconds when the keycap comes into contact and actually starts pressing, and until when the computer actually receives the signal, which gives us a more accurate millisecond compared to, you know, just looking at the numbers, 8,000 Hz polling rate, 16k Hz scanning rate. There's no problem looking at the polling rate, scan rate, actuation point, stuff like that, but yeah, the best way to check its responsiveness and performance is latency tests. That also takes into consideration the calibration, the firmware of the keyboard, so when it actually presses the key like I do. I think those tests that like kind of plug something in the PCB and kind of opens up the whole keyboard doesn't really necessarily display the actual latency, because you don't do that when you're using the keyboard. You actually press the keycaps to the switch, to the PCB, to the computer. So yeah, that's the test that I do, at least. Now, there's also different types of magnetic keyboard. There's Hall effect, there's TMR, there's induction or inductive switches. Not gonna lie, you're probably not gonna notice any difference between those when actually gaming, but looking at the numbers and my latency tests, TMR is gonna be the fastest, and that is also compatible with mechanical switches, by the way. You can kind of hot swap that. So yeah, I feel like TMR is gonna be the best option, but if you're worried if like you're gonna notice the difference between TMR, Hall effect, inductive, no. Now, moving on to the next thing that you should consider when buying a magnetic keyboard, it's the sound and the looks. Now, you might say, I just care about the performance, I'm buying a magnetic keyboard to game with, I don't care about the looks, I don't care about the sound. Well, you know, might as well, since there's so many good options nowadays, so many good competitions, so many like good lookings and good sounding ones. Might as well, you know, pick the best one. We're trying to find the best one, right? Now, I think the best way to figure out if you're gonna like the sound of a magnetic keyboard is watch a sound test of that magnetic keyboard. On my reviews, I also do sound tests, so you can actually hear it. Do you like it? Because it can totally be personal preference. Same with the looks. You know, look at reviews, look at videos, look at pictures. What do you think about its looks? It's totally gonna be personal preference. I really like this look, but I heard some people not liking it. They prefer a darker color, so they do have a dark color variation for this keyboard as well. So, you know, you might want that instead. Can totally be personal preference. Now, of course, the lower your budget, the less expectations you can have on the looks and the sounds, but not gonna lie, there is some pretty good sounding and looking budget magnetic keyboards out there. One thing I would suggest though is make sure the magnetic keyboard you're buying is compatible with switches like Gateron Jade Pro or something like TTC Magnetos, those magnetic switches that have the magnet on the center. The keyboard you're buying doesn't necessarily have to have that pre-installed, but just make sure it's compatible with that. So just in case in the future you're planning to upgrade your magnetic keyboard, the sound or the feel, you can have a lot more options if that magnetic keyboard you bought is compatible with those switches. Which most magnetic keyboards are compatible with those, but there are some that are a bit weird and are not compatible with that. So just make sure. Now, moving on to the next thing you should consider, it's the case. Now, if you have more budget, you can expect a better quality case, better looking as well, with some good designs, crazy good designs. But yeah, you're either gonna have a metal case or a plastic case. Now, I think most of us is gonna prefer the aluminum case because it's higher quality. It does make the keyboard sound better, more durable. But there are some plastic keyboards that actually sound better than some aluminum cased keyboards. So I'm not saying that as long as it has an aluminum case, it's gonna be better than a plastic. But yeah, another thing you should consider though when getting an aluminum case, of course, is it's gonna be heavier. So if you're planning to travel a lot with your keyboard, then you might want to consider a plastic one instead, since it's gonna be much lighter and it's gonna be much easier to travel with. Now, moving on to the next thing you should consider, I think this is pretty general in all keyboards, it's not just magnetic. It's gonna be the layout. We do have some 80% keyboards, 75% keyboards, 60% keyboards, sometimes in the middle like a 63 sometimes. sometimes. But yeah, the lowest you can expect is around 60%, and the biggest is gonna be around 80. There is some bigger options than 80% magnetic keyboards, but not much at the moment of filming this video. All those layouts you can pretty much game on, no problems. But if you want some arrow keys, then you would definitely want higher than 60%. A 63% does have the arrow keys and it's still pretty compact. A 68% key is also pretty compact. It does have more keys than a 63 or a 60% though. Other than the arrow keys, it also has something like a delete key or a home key or page up, page down. Then if you want the F keys, the F arrow F1 to 12, you're gonna want at least a 75%. And then if you want more extra keys like these guys, you would want an 80% or a TKL. And some magnetic keyboards also has knobs, so if you want that to quickly adjust the volume and stuff. So yeah, consider how many keys do you usually use a lot. I mean, you can kind of reprogram the FN layer. So even if you have something like a 60%, you can still reprogram the FN plus this to be the arrow keys. But it's not really a good experience personally, so I would rather get a keyboard that actually has those dedicated keys. But yeah, those are pretty much the main things you should consider when buying a magnetic keyboard. Now, of course, there's also some other things like, for example, you want the wirelessness feature, tri-mode connectivity, then of course, find a magnetic keyboard with that type of feature. Maybe you want a keyboard that you can easily open up. Then you can also find keyboards that has that quick release system. Maybe you want the keyboard with a screen. There is also some keyboards like that. Those are pretty obvious. Just find the keyboard with those types of features if you want those, of course. But yeah, I pretty hope that this video helped you in some way. I hope I was able to help you answer the question, what magnetic keyboard is the best for you? Now, I did mention a few models, keyboards, brands here of magnetic keyboards, but if you're expecting me to give you a lot of magnetic keyboard names, this is not that video. This is more of a guide to help you answer which actual magnetic keyboard is for you. And if you already have some magnetic keyboards in mind that you really like, you just have trouble in picking which one, then yeah, I hope this video kind of helped you decide which is gonna be the better one. Because some of you were asking as well, like, which is better, the A68 or the Mix 87? Which is the best out of these two? Now again, it will really depend on you. Of course, 80% layout here with a knob and all that stuff, or you want a more compact 68%, get this one instead if you want that. All of us have different bests. There is not one best, one size fits all magnetic keyboard. But yeah, again, even though this video wasn't a suggestion video, if you're a budget gamer, get this from this company, this type of model. Even though this video isn't that type of video, I'm planning to release one though. But yeah, if you guys want that, make sure you like, subscribe to let me know, and so that you don't miss the video when I upload it. Also, comment down below if you have any suggestions, future video ideas, or products you want me to review. Or maybe despite considering the things I mentioned in this video, you still cannot decide which keyboard is you're gonna be buying. Then you can also comment it down below or join my Discord server. A lot of my community and other viewers also discuss there about different keyboards, and you know, I'm also active there, so maybe we can help all each other and this Discord server decide which is gonna be the best for you. If you want to see my more detailed review video on the keyboards I mentioned here and more other keyboards, you can just search the name of the keyboard plus MIGSS on YouTube. For example, Slice 75 MIGSS. My review video should be the one that pops up first or somewhere there. But yeah, I'll go and see you guys in the next one. Don't forget to stay grateful. Remember that Jesus loves you. Bye-bye.